The king of rock and roll didn't just leave audiences breathless with his voice. Behind the spotlight, he left someone paralyzed with fear. One night after the lights went down and the curtain closed, something happened backstage that no one expected. A private encounter turned tense, then terrifying. A glittering gift, a sudden threat, and a split-second decision that could have changed everything. What unfolded in that room would haunt one person forever. And by the end of this video, it might just change how you see Elvis Presley. By 1975, the dazzling facade of Elvis Presley's fame was beginning to crack. The crowd still screamed his name, the spotlight still followed him, but behind the scenes, the man who once electrified the world was unraveling. Years of performing, personal loss, and a growing dependency on prescription drugs had taken a visible toll. His once unshakable energy now flickered unpredictably, and those closest to him began to notice alarming changes, not just in his health, but in his mood, his behavior, and his sense of control. As the tour pressed on, tension simmered within Elvis's inner circle. What should have been a tightly bonded group of musicians began to fray under the weight of emotional outbursts and strange behavior. Backup singers and band members, who had long admired and respected the king, suddenly found themselves walking on eggshells, never knowing which version of Elvis would appear on stage or backstage. The harmony that once connected the team had shifted into something more volatile, more fragile, and increasingly unpredictable. Among those caught in this growing storm was Kathy Westmoreland, a gifted soprano who had earned her place on stage, but whose connection to Elvis went far beyond the professional. Their relationship had been complicated, marked by moments of closeness and long stretches of emotional distance. At times she was a friend, at others, something more. But as Elvis's world grew darker, that closeness would become a dangerous burden. What started as shared history would soon twist into a situation so intense, so unnerving, that it would leave her questioning everything, including her own safety. As the 1975 tour rolled across cities, the spotlight wasn't always kind, and neither was Elvis. What had once been playful banter during performances began to shift into something sharper, meaner. Kathy Westmoreland, who had stood behind Elvis countless times, microphone in hand, suddenly found herself the subject of his public ridicule. In front of thousands, Elvis let loose with crude jokes, insinuations, and remarks that went far beyond teasing. The audience laughed, perhaps unaware of how deeply the words cut. But Kathy felt every sting. She stood there, smiling through clenched teeth, pretending nothing was wrong, while the man she once trusted chipped away at her dignity from center stage. The tension finally boiled over one night. During a particularly volatile performance, Elvis's behavior spiraled into open hostility, not just toward Kathy, but toward nearly all the backup singers. He hurled words that weren't just unkind, but outright degrading. Something snapped. One by one, the singers began to leave the stage, their silent protest echoing louder than any lyric. The show staggered forward, but the damage was done. For those who had spent years standing faithfully behind the king, it was a painful, public breaking point. Kathy didn't return. While others were coaxed or pressured back, she made a different choice. Refusing to subject herself to more humiliation, she stayed off stage, away from the glare of the lights and the unpredictable moods that came with them. It wasn't just a professional decision, it was personal, defiant, and bold. She drew a line, and by doing so, unknowingly set a chain of events in motion that would soon place her in one of the most frightening moments of her life. After that chaotic show, long after the final note had echoed into silence and the crowd had gone home, a message came for Kathy. Elvis wanted to see her. It wasn't a request, it was an expectation. Despite the uneasy tension from earlier that night, despite her decision not to perform, something compelled her to go. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was unfinished business. As she walked through the quiet corridors of the hotel, a chill ran down her spine. Something felt off. This wasn't just a conversation waiting to happen. It was something heavier, something unspoken. When she entered the room, the sight that greeted her was bizarre and unsettling. Elvis sat calmly on the edge of his bed, wearing his usual off-stage attire, loose-fitting karate pajamas. But it wasn't the outfit that caught her breath. In one hand, he held a neatly wrapped gift. In the other, a gun. The objects were so starkly different, yet both offered in the same deliberate motion. The air in the room seemed to stop. There was no warmth, no smile, just Elvis staring at her, presenting two choices that couldn't have been more chilling. Then came the question. Delivered without a trace of irony or humor, his voice low and steady. Which do you want, this or this? Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely think. The absurd contrast between the elegant box and the cold steel was surreal. Kathy stood frozen, caught in a moment that didn't feel real, a twisted performance playing out far from the stage, where the consequences could be far more dangerous than a bad review or a bruised ego. In that surreal moment, Kathy's instincts took over. Her face smiled, but her body screamed in panic. Every muscle tensed beneath the surface, as if her nerves were ready to collapse. Her heart pounded so fiercely she could barely hear her own thoughts. Yet somehow, she forced herself to breathe. She couldn't afford to show fear. Whatever was going through Elvis's mind, she knew one thing. She had to stay calm, or at least appear to. The room was quiet, but the silence was deafening. And in that heavy stillness, she smiled as if everything was fine. With a trembling voice, she kept steady. Kathy pointed to the wrapped gift and said lightly, "Why, I'll take the gift, of course. Thank you." She even let out a laugh, one she hoped would float harmlessly through the air and ease whatever tension had filled the room. But inside, she was unraveling. Her thoughts raced. What is he doing? What is he capable of? She didn't know the answer, and that uncertainty was almost worse than the fear itself. All she could do was play along, hoping the moment would pass without something irreversible taking place. As the tension thinned, Kathy took a deep breath and delivered her quiet decision. She told him she would finish the tour. She would honor what remained. But after that, she was done. The connection they once shared was too damaged, too dangerous to keep pretending. Elvis's response was unexpectedly calm. He looked at her, then shrugged and said, "If you think it's best, then it's best. I won't stop you." No anger, no begging, just that eerie stillness again, as if the storm had suddenly passed or was simply waiting to return. Kathy wasn't alone in her frustration. Whispers of dissatisfaction had been circulating among the backup singers for weeks. Low murmurs backstage, exchanged glances during rehearsals, the kind of quiet rebellion that brews when trust begins to erode. Elvis's unpredictable moods and stinging onstage comments didn't just affect one person. They cast a long, uncomfortable shadow over the entire group. For a band built on rhythm and harmony, emotional dissonance had taken center stage. Some singers were reaching a breaking point, questioning whether the glamour of the spotlight was worth the toll it was taking behind the scenes. Word of unrest reached Elvis, and while he didn't immediately apologize, perhaps out of pride or perhaps denial, he clearly sensed something had shifted. Then, in a move that caught everyone off guard, he responded the only way he knew how, extravagantly. Without warning, he showered his backup singers with luxurious gifts, hoping to smooth over the damage. Gold chains, gem-studded rings, elegant wristwatches. No expense was spared. It wasn't just a peace offering, it was a spectacle. The kind of grand gesture only Elvis could pull off, wrapped in velvet boxes and sealed with the weight of unspoken regret. He basically bought out a jewelry store, one insider would later say, half in awe, half in disbelief. And while the glitter may have dulled the tension temporarily, everyone knew it wasn't just about the gifts. It was an attempt to restore something that had been slipping away. Loyalty, perhaps, or control. Either way, the message was clear. Elvis was willing to pay any price to keep his world intact, even if it meant masking deeper cracks that couldn't be fixed with diamonds. As the public cheered the king of rock and roll from afar, few realized how deeply his private world had become entangled with danger, and not just the kind that came with fame. Elvis Presley's fascination with firearms had begun years earlier, but by the mid-70s it had evolved into something far more intense. Guns weren't just part of his collection, they were part of his identity. He carried them often, flaunted them casually, and handled them with a sense of power that seemed to go beyond necessity. To those close to him, it was more than a hobby. It was an obsession creeping into everyday life. Priscilla Presley, who knew Elvis more intimately than most, later revealed just how far his fantasies had gone. In her book, she described a man no longer satisfied by his career or stage performances, someone who started creating his own personal dramas just to feel alive. He would speak of death threats, real or imagined, with a mix of paranoia and conviction. And through his ties with local law enforcement, he even obtained lists of suspected criminals, lists he believed he had a personal responsibility to act on. One night, out of nowhere, he called Priscilla and asked her a question that sounded more like a line from a gangster film than a late-night check-in. "Scylla, you have anyone you want taken care of?" Strictly top secret. Incidents like these weren't just rumors whispered in back rooms. They were witnessed. He once dropped a gun on stage mid-performance, stunning the audience and rattling his bandmates. At times, he fired shots in frustration or to command attention, as though the explosive sound could somehow drown out his inner chaos. To the outside world, Elvis was still a legend, but to those who stood close enough to see the cracks, the glittering jumpsuits and megawatt smile couldn't hide the darker figure forming behind them. Armed, unpredictable, and perhaps no longer sure where the performance ended and reality began. If you're finding this story as fascinating and unsettling as we are, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a deep dive into the untold moments behind the legends. Like this video if it kept you watching, and share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear from you. What do you think was really going on behind the scenes? Let's talk about it.